Hi, I'm Laurie Niles with Violinist.com, and I'm here with Tom Metzler from Thomas Metzler Violin Shop in Glendale, California. And we want to talk today about Cremonese violins because, first of all, he just had an exhibit of Cremonese violins. And Cremonese, what do I mean? I mean violins from Cremona, Italy, which is where the great Stradivari did his work, and it's become this center of violin making now. And so, Tom, have you actually been to Cremona?
I have. And first of all, Laurie, it's great having you here in the shop, and it's a great pleasure. Over our 46-year history, we've had many of these exhibitions, and I think we've had probably almost a dozen of Italian instrument exhibitions, but more recently we focused a little bit more on contemporary American instruments and bows. And the reason we like to highlight these contemporary instruments is that we find that they're really a great value. The prices are usually reasonable, the sound can be tremendous, and they have the advantage of not having any prior repairs, which is really a tremendous advantage. And also we feel like we're helping the living makers, because it is quite an ordeal for them to find outlets for their instruments. So for the last 7 years, we've highlighted the American makers, but this year we were really pleased to have an invitation to receive instruments from Cremona, Italy, as you said, and it appears that this is one of the largest shipments of Cremonese stringed instruments ever, because we have 50 instruments. And typically they send out 25 or maybe 30. Yeah. So we feel very honored that we got this big collection. We have 33 violins, I think it's 8 violas, 9 cellos, and a few bows, all made in Cremona. And the makers are all members, members of the Antonio Stradivari Consortium of Cremonese violin makers. And the reason that this organization is important is they vet the makers very heavily. They ensure that all the instruments made by these makers were actually made in Cremona and made to the highest standards. They also issue these large format certificates of authenticity with photographs and all the details about the making of that particular instrument. So we think that's just a nice little add-on, that these instruments all have these certificates.
Fancy.
So let's see, what's next, Blair?
Well, I wanted to ask you, what's the first time you ever went to Cremona, and what made it so interesting to you? I don't think it was such a center of violin making. I mean, it was back with Stradivari, right? And then it kind of fell
At the
out.
end of the 18th century, the violin making sort of died out in Italy. There were 1 or 2 known makers then, but then throughout the 1800s, there were not too many makers there. And I forget the year that the school was established, but back in the 50s or 60s, 1950s or 60s, their International School of Violin Making was founded. And ever since then, the numbers have built up again, and today it's a really important center. I think there's close to 100 students, and there's probably 150 violin makers in Cremona. Wow. And so it's really and it's a beautiful city too. So
this is in your lifetime then, like in your lifetime.
Yeah, I'm that old.
Well, but I mean, it's not that long. I mean, it has emerged as this center of violin making, and has like.
Yeah, and I was trained actually in Germany in the town of Mittenwald. So my first visit to Cremona was a school trip that we took. The whole school, which was very small, about 32 people, went to Cremona, and we visited the school, and we were just there for maybe 2 days. But that was my first big eye-opening about Cremona as a city and also as a center of violin making.
So you were visiting a brand new school, basically, then?
Well, it wasn't quite brand, maybe a 2-decade-old,
Okay.
2-decade-old school.
Okay.
And then I've been back 2 or 3 times since then. Maybe 4 times since then. So not as often as I'd like to, because it's really a beautiful place to visit, and I have good friends there now.
Yeah.
From having done these exhibitions for so long.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm holding a Ferrari in my hands, which sounds pretty zippy, right? But
Yeah,
tell me
literally.
about. So this is one of the instruments at the exhibition. So tell me a little bit about.
Well, the maker's name is actually Michele or Michael Ferrari, and that is his real name. I'm holding a viola made by Giorgio Grisales, and not only is he a wonderful maker, his instruments always look really beautiful. He's also the president of this consortium. So of course we have his instruments as well, but they are some of the nicer instruments here. We also have a really beautiful cello over here. The back is quite stunning, and this was made by Paolo Rizzi. Some of these makers I know personally, but I don't know this maker myself. So the price range of these instruments is sort of all over the place, from as low as under $10,000 to over $60,000. And that's because some of the makers, like Mr. Grisales, are master makers with many decades, sometimes 4 decades of experience. And other makers are fairly young and maybe out of school only for 3 or 4 years, still with wonderful training, or they would not have been accepted into this group. But that accounts for the big widespread difference in pricing.
Well, so tell me a little bit about the Ferrari guy. Like I'm just curious about some of these people. How do you know how old these makers are, and a little bit about their story?
We might have to cut, and I have to go. My honest answer is I don't know his bio exactly, but all of the information is up on our website. We do have for every single instrument in the exhibition now. They're up on YouTube with some really nice high quality videos, and they also link to our website where there are bios available.
So for this exhibition, did some of the people come from Cremona here when they brought the violins and cellos and violas over?
Yeah. Well, this year we had 2 representatives come over, and they stayed with us for about 5-6 days. And that actually, Giorgio Grisales, the president, was one of them. And then the secretary of the organization, Barbara, also accompanied him. In the past exhibitions, we've had maybe up to 4 of the makers come at one time. And one funny, I think it was, when was the big LA earthquake in the late 1990s? 4 of the makers were here and staying at my place, and in the middle of the night there was this giant earthquake, and one of the makers comes running out of the bedroom in his underwear with a pillow on his head, and it was I had to laugh even though he was very frightened. It was quite a funny experience, but it adds a lot when they come in person, and they can also say a few words in person at our exhibition. We had 2 nights of public demonstrations of these instruments, and we had some really fine performers. I'm going to blank here, but we'll come back to that.
Andres Cardenas and Jenny
Seo,
and
what was the cellist?
Andrew Schulman.
Yeah. Okay. So so we had 2 nights of public demonstrations, and one night we had violinist Andres Cardenas perform, and he was wonderful. Played all 33 violins, and then from the LA Phil we had violist Jenny Seo come and play all 8 of our violas, and then on a separate evening we had. Here, I'm drawing a blank here. I got to redo this.
Andrew Schulman from LA Chamber Orchestra.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Well, when you
What's his first name? Schulman.
Andrew.
Andrew Schulman. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So we're also pleased to have Andrew Schulman try out all the cellos on one of the evenings.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
What were their impressions? Did they have any overall, had they played Cremonese instruments before, or?
I think they were all fans of contemporary instruments, and I know that Mr. Schulman plays a contemporary instrument. I think it's an English instrument made back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So not brand new, but he's a fan of contemporary instruments. And Andres Cardenas loves contemporary instruments, and he's said that many times. And he was extremely complimentary of many of the instruments.
Yeah.
And even though I don't think Jenny Seo expressed an opinion particular about contemporary instruments, she was also very praiseworthy of many of the violas.
Yeah, yeah. Does Cremona ever have an American? Do they ever?
An opportunity that I hadn't thought about.
Yeah. You know, does Cremona ever bring in a bunch of American? Because America has become a center of violin making as well, really. Right?
America has wonderful violin makers.
Yeah.
We've been great advocates of American violin making, but I don't know that has ever happened. Laurie, do you want to go in together?
There we go. Yeah, I'll go to that.
I think that would be really fun. We could also bring American spaghetti to Cremona.
Well, I don't know if they would like.
They would like that.
I want that. Wow. Yeah.
So one of the cello makers, Sardone is his name. Actually, when he came to America a couple of years ago, he brought with him a whole supply of Italian pastas, Italian olive oils, and tomato sauces. He didn't trust that he would find the right thing at our grocery store.
Oh, really? Just for himself to eat, not as a gift or something like that? That's
for
pretty
his
funny.
Airbnb.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Is there any, certain characteristics that you would say, like as a maker of Cremonese instruments as opposed to American instruments or
Well,
German-made instruments, or?
For many decades, Cremonese instruments were marked by no antiquing. They were varnished straight, kind of plain in the antiquing, but they'd try to go wild with beautiful wood.
Do you mean in the late 20th century? Or?
In the mid to late 20th century,
Yeah.
you didn't see any antiquing.
Really?
But much more recently, that fad has taken on all over the world, actually, including here in the States. And more of the instruments now, like this one is just very subtly shaded, but other instruments in this exhibition were heavily antiqued as well as shaded. And most people kind of like that antique look, but the purists, like they say, well, Stradivari never made antique instruments. He made them look brand new, and it took 300 years to have them look like they look today. So.
And is that that's just like the purist idea of I just want to show the wood as it is, kind of? I mean, what was the reason for that fad?
Well, the fad was doing the antiquing later on. The original idea was just you varnished it as nicely and neatly as you could, and it would look beautiful, and time would take its toll, and it would look like an antique someday.
Right.
And now today people say, well, the public wants it to look like an antique tomorrow, so we'll antique them. So both styles are worthy.
Sure.
But it's actually almost more difficult to make a beautiful non-antiqued instrument because everything has to be just right.
Yeah.
The workmanship, the varnishing.
On this thing.
Yeah, that's pretty beautiful, isn't it?
What causes that? That is so different because it's not. I think of there's usually lines or something. What is?
Well, like this is what we would call
that contrast.
a quarter cut maple two-piece back.
Right.
So the pieces of wood are cut like pieces of pie from the log.
Yeah.
With the grain going vertical like this. Whereas something like this is more slab cut, meaning the grain is running instead of this way, it's running more this way. And so it gives a different look. And this is probably what we would call a quilted maple back because it kind of looks like a patchwork quilt, this irregular.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it's very pretty.
So it's a maple on the back, and the front is always.
It's almost always spruce.
Spruce.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's just lines. It's so interesting, the contrast there.
Yeah. So this one is slightly antique, but very little. You see the top looks almost new, but you see little speckles of black. So they've done some very subtle antiquing.
Is there anything else that's like a feature, you know, a signature of a Cremonese violin, like a scroll or something like that? Or?
Not really, because everybody now is copying the great masters.
Okay.
And I did notice in this particular exhibition that a huge number of them were making Guarneri del Gesù copies.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
a few of them, I think this is a Montagazza copy. There's a few Strad copies, but people here in the States are doing the same thing. Everybody has access to digital photographs, and the museums around the world are visited by everybody. So the instruments are becoming more and more like each other. You don't really have a German or a French. Maybe you might still have a French look, but not so much in the rest of the world.
Interesting. Wow. And then these are all like made within the last 5 years or this century about? Or were
Actually,
there any from the 20th century? Of the 50 that came over?
No, they're all from, most of them are from this year or last year. We
Oh,
have
wow.
a lot of them dated 2025,
Whoa.
which really kind of shocked me, because that means they probably put the labels in like a week before they shipped them here.
Yeah.
And some of them were maybe 2 or 3 or even 10 years old, but that's about the oldest
Like
in this group.
So for the modern luthier, how long does it take to make a violin?
Well, I think it would be reasonable for many makers to make only between 6 and 10 instruments per year.
Okay, 6 and 10 a
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
Mhm.
Depending on some of them have assistants that do help them, so that things
Yeah.
can go a lot faster.
Sure.
And others work solely all by themselves and take longer. So yeah, that's kind of a difficult question because it varies. It's the same here in the States, you know.
Yeah.
Some people make only 2 or 3 instruments a year, and some can make a dozen.
Mhm. Well, and what do you feel is like the advantage? I'm just gonna stop for a second. Don't move around. Like I think we're getting some
Oh,
stop.
okay.
I'm just thinking about that.
Okay.
What would you say is like the advantage of having like a bench-made instrument, meaning like an instrument where you know the maker, or you know, like having an instrument where the maker is actually alive, or you know, that this is sort of intriguing to me, you know, that right now the violin that I play most of the time, I don't even really, you know, definitely couldn't talk to the maker.
Right.
You know, it's so old.
Yeah, I think that is a great benefit, because it is really fun for most musicians to meet the guy or the woman that made their instrument. And if they haven't done it, I would encourage it, because it's very rewarding, both for the musician and also for the maker, to meet the person that's enjoying the fruits of their labors.
Yeah.
So many well-established makers sell directly to musicians, but other younger makers often find that they need the help of an intermediary, because it's really difficult to market instruments if you're just getting started.
Right.
So
like, would most violin makers welcome, you know, someone inquiring like, hey, I have one of your violins, I just wanted to.
I think most makers would be really thrilled by that.
Yeah.
In fact, I try to connect musicians and the makers if I can. In a case like this where they're contemporary instruments being sold, then I will let the makers know who bought them. And I'll do the same. I'll let the musicians know how to contact the makers. Although that's usually easy to find out through a Google search.
Google it. The world is really different.
Yeah, it is. It's really different. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so we only have these instruments for another 10 days or so. We are busy taking appointments for people to come see all these beautiful instruments at our shop here in Glendale, California. And we will be purchasing a certain number for our own inventory, but unfortunately we cannot afford to buy all 50 of them. So we'll be making some hard decisions, but these instruments, to a certain number of them, will still be available throughout the year.
Yeah.
And of course, we hope we'll be getting the best sounding ones, but that's very subjective, so it's hard to say.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks for bringing all of these violins, to America. I mean, I think it's sort of a unique idea that you have here, and you've done it several times where you bring a whole bunch of instruments from.
I wanted to say that my late wife, Barbara, had a big hand in getting these shows going. It was actually her idea back in the 1980s, not the 1880s, the 1980s, to organize a show of Italian instruments. And this had not been done, to my knowledge, to any large extent. Maybe there were 2 or 3 shown here or 2 or 3 there. So we organized the first show of Italian instruments back in the 1980s, and with the help of brothers Musafia. And Dimitri Musafia is a case maker in Cremona, and his brother Dominic was a violin dealer up in Seattle.
Yeah.
And so the 2 of them helped organize the very first show of instruments in the States.
And these were modern instruments.
Yes, these were the first show of Cremonese modern contemporary instruments. So I just wanted to let the public know that my wife had a lot to do with that. So I thank her for that.
Well, Barbara was a brilliant woman, and I mean, it's a really wonderful idea. It's really neat to see these instruments from halfway across the world.
Thank you. I know you're a advocate of all things musical, but thank you for taking the time to come look at these and talk to me.
Sure. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, Laurie. Take care.